We're going to go ahead and dive into tonight's text. If you remember, we've been spending the fall looking in depth at Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, which in our Bibles is titled 1 Corinthians. And over the last few weeks and over the next couple weeks coming up, we've been looking, and we will be looking at Paul's theology of the Spirit. That's what we've been looking at the last few weeks. That's what we're looking at these next few weeks, Paul's theology of the Spirit. What does the Apostle Paul believe about the Spirit of God? The Corinthians, if you remember, they were obsessed with speaking in tongues. They thought that this was the definitive sign that they've reached like an angelic status. And Paul agrees that speaking in tongues is a legitimate activity of the Spirit, but the way that they are practicing these gifts is not at all in alignment with the ethic of Jesus. Like, sure, you could speak in tongues, that's awesome, but they celebrate a man sleeping with his stepmom, and that's not okay. Sure, they prophesy, but they're taking each other to court. Followers of Jesus, siblings in Christ, are taking one another to court. Sure, they have this knowledge, but the rich are abusing the poor in their gatherings, and they're going to pagan temples to worship, to partake in these pagan festivals and these pagan feasts. Now, the chapter that we just read, 1 Corinthians 13, you guys heard it read out loud tonight. Thank you, Jared, for reading that. That is the most popular chapter in this book, hands down. We hear this chapter a lot at weddings. Nothing wrong with that. Paul is certainly not speaking. He's not talking to people who are getting married. Yes, sweetheart. Hey, you became Kaylee tonight? Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Oh, you need help getting up? I know these shoes are kind of big. Hey, you going to go to mama? Or you want to stay here with me? She's going to stay here, yeah. So you probably have heard this text read at some venue. I wasn't a follower of Jesus for most of my life, and I heard this text either on TV and media, heard it at a wedding or something like that. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but Paul isn't talking to people who are getting married. Paul is writing to a community of Jesus' followers that are fractured with division. He is speaking to people who are acting out of selfish interest and personal gain, altogether abandoning the ethic of Jesus' kingdom, which is to love God and love others. Jesus said that this is the greatest commandment. And Paul just said, if you remember a couple weeks ago, we didn't meet last week because of the storm, but 2 weeks ago, Paul just said right before this that the church is one body. We are the body of Messiah with many parts that each perform a different function. And all the parts of the body are necessary and essential for the body to flourish. One body part cannot say to another body part, I don't need you. You know, here's the thing. We obsess over spiritual gifts. Again, that's not a phrase that the Bible never uses that phrase, spiritual gifts. A lot of bad theology there. But we treat these gifts like they're superpowers. But the reason that they've been given to us is for the sake of others. Yes, they're given to you, but they're not given to you for you. They're given to you for other people. And Paul said, remember last week, that we need to eagerly desire those gifts that have the potential to build everyone up, not just the ones that build us up as individuals. And before he continues his train of thought, we get all of chapter 13. And please don't let the familiarity of this text detract from its beauty. Please do not, don't tap out, don't check out mentally and think, I've already heard this, I know this. This is probably the most challenging and difficult text I have had to read through and teach through and study on and write on over the last few weeks, just because of how convicting it is. So Paul calls this, he starts by saying, this is the most excellent way, or literally in Greek, the way that is beyond comparison. When the Spirit does things through us, or when God has gifted you in a specific way, again, that could be anything from plumbing to prophecy. What is the most excellent way that we are to use that gift or that manifestation of the Spirit? Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, again, real quick, what were the Corinthians obsessed with? Yeah. They thought that these tongues that they spoke in were like a heavenly language, like what the angels speak. Basically, it was like, oh, you don't speak an angel? I'll pray for you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I speak an archangel. Like, yeah, that's how they were acting, and that's so messed up. That they think that being pneumatikoi, that being spirit people, means becoming basically like angels, which is so backwards because we are not angels. We will never be angels. We will rule over angels in the new creation. Angels, the Bible says, are signs of God. Humans are images of God. There's a big difference. So Paul says, if the Spirit has granted you that ability to speak in other unknown languages, but if you have that ability but you don't have love, then that ability is completely useless. It's the same as a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. It would be like me hitting the cymbal of a drum with no rhythm, just sporadically hitting it. It's really loud, but that's not music. That's not music. It's just annoying, is what it is. The Corinthians, they were formerly pagans, And they would use symbols in their pagan worship. Paul is saying that if you are speaking in tongues, which again, that's a genuine activity of the Spirit. That's awesome. That's great if you do that. That's a genuine activity of the Spirit. If you do that though, if that person does that, but they're devoid of love, then even if it's loud, it's as empty and hollow as the worship of demons. And this would have been a kick in the throat to them. That's what he's saying. You're so obsessed with these gifts, so obsessed with speaking in tongues, but let me tell you, if you do that but you have no love, that is just as hollow and empty as demon worship. So Paul continues. He says, listen, if I have prophetic powers, like God consistently speaks through me, and I can understand all mysteries, all open secrets, and I have this special knowledge from God, like I experience apocalyptic visions, that sounds pretty cool. He says, but if I have all that, and if I have the kind of faith that Jesus talked about, that special kind of faith that's a gift from God, a faith that can move mountains, if I have all of that, but I don't have love, I am nothing. I'm empty. I'm useless. I am just making noise and taking up space. My life is devoid of all meaning and significance if I don't have love. Paul says, if I give all of my earthly possessions away to the poor, if I even die for Jesus, but I don't have love, I gain nothing. Now, that last one sounds pretty sacrificial, right? You give away all your stuff, you die for Jesus. The Corinthians are not doing that. Paul actually is doing that. That's his daily experience, and that's Paul's destiny, what his life is leading towards. But if Paul did all of that, if he chose poverty and suffering even to death, at the end of his life, it would all be for nothing if he did not have love. So actually, this is really key. Paul says you can do the actions without having love. You could do certain actions, but do them without love. Now, the opposite is not true. The opposite is not true, as we'll see. You can't love without action. That is not love. If there's no action, then it's just words. That's not real love. But you can do these things. You could do these things like it's just an act of begrudging submission. It's not really for other people. You're just doing it out of a sense of duty or religious whatever. Paul says, I am nothing, I have nothing, I gain nothing, I do nothing if I don't have love. Now, that leads to a really important key question for tonight. What then is love? And that might seem like a dumb question, that might seem really self-explanatory for us, but this is really important because in our culture, we only have one word for love, and that word is love. And we use it for all the time, for all kinds of different things. I constantly say that I love pizza. I use that word for pizza. But I also use that word for my beautiful bride. I say, I love Elizabeth. I love my wife. One is something that I prefer. The other one is a person I've made a lifelong covenant commitment to. You see what I mean? See what the problem is? But I use the same word for both things. When we say we love this or that, a lot of times what we mean is that we have an attraction to or affections toward someone or something. In the case of pizza, when I say I love it, what I mean by that is that I desire to consume it for my satisfaction. And for a lot of people, that's what love is to them in our culture. In the West, there's little difference. I mean, in the East too, but especially in the West, in our American culture, there's a little difference in our definitions between love and lust. Less and less is there any distinction between the two. Love, as it's defined in our culture and by our standards, is completely self-centered. It's all about me. And if I love something, that thing serves the purpose of filling this void in my life. We think of love as a feeling, something that happens to you. The biblical authors don't see love that way. And listen, love isn't necessarily without feelings of affection. It's not necessarily without affectionate feelings, but you can love someone or something even in the absence of all those warm fuzzies. Even if you feel no warm fuzzies, you can still choose love in that moment because love is action. Love is a choice. In English, we only have one word for love. In Greek, they have 4 words for love. 4 words. We just have the one word. Koine Greek has 4 words. The first word is phileo. Here, let's just say these out loud. Phileo. Can you say phileo? Phileo. That's like the brotherly love that friends feel towards each other. And then there's storge. Can you say storge? Yeah, that's more familial love, the kind of loyalty you have amongst family members. Eros, can you guys say eros? Eros, that's more the romantic, sexual, passionate love that a person feels towards their spouse. And then there's this 4th kind, the word that Paul uses all throughout the chapter, and that 4th word is agape. Can you guys say agape? Agape. And agape is the kind of sacrificial love that seeks the well-being of others, even at my own expense. It's the kind of generous love that expects nothing in return. It is completely others-oriented. And when the New Testament authors, when they talk about the love that God shows us, or even when John, the Apostle John will say in his letter, 1 John, that God is love, he's using this word, agape. It's the very nature of God, agape. Because see, God is Trinity. God is Trinity. Our God, the God we believe is at the center of the universe and created all things, is an eternal community of others-centered, self-giving persons. And this is the God in whose image we have been made. So to become more loving, to become more agape, this is what it means to become truly human. And because Jesus was God, become the truly human one that we were all made to be, but failed to be, rather than provide like a definition of agape, the New Testament authors, like Paul, they define agape according to the life and the teachings of Jesus. They say, this is agape. How do we know what agape is? Look at Jesus. Look at what he said and look at what he did. What Jesus said and what Jesus did is the essence of agape. He gave himself for us. Paul constantly says, this is how you know what love is. He gave himself for us. John says in 1 John, this is how we know what agape is. Jesus laid down his life for us. And so next, what we see after that, verses 4 onward, this is the part that we hear at weddings. Paul gives a list. These next 15 things we read about love in this passage. You can take the word love here and replace it, I think, with Jesus. You could take this whole passage about love and replace it with Jesus. There are a few places in the Bible that give us, I think, a better description of who Jesus is. Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus is not jealous or boastful or arrogant or rude. Without this kind of agape love, Paul says we are nothing and we gain nothing. Nothing we do and nothing we are matters if we don't have this kind of agape love. So question, what does this kind of love look like tangibly? I'm so glad you asked. I'm so glad you asked. Paul begins with two things. He begins with two things that agape is, and then he gives a list of 8 things that agape is not. And then he gives 5 more things that agape is. So agape is patient. Can you guys say the word patient? Okay, so pause there. Really key. In our Bibles, this is really important. This is going to shape how you see the whole thing. The way that we read in our Bibles, if you read an English Bible, probably the way it's translated, it sounds like these are adjectives that describe love. Like love is patient. But there's no adjectives in this passage. All 15 things that we read here are verbs, and love is the one doing the action. Does that make sense? The love of Jesus inside of us is being patient, right? It isn't that like love is patient and that's what love is like. No, love is being patient. Love is action. If there's no action, it's not agape. So agape is being patient. That's what he's saying. It's a verb. Agape is being patient. Just because you're a patient person doesn't mean that you're doing agape. Agape is when you're actually being patient. And the Greek word for patient here just means long suffering. I think the KJV, the King Jimmy, says, love long suffereth. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like, no, it's long-tempered. Love, agape, please hear me, agape does not have a short fuse. It's like I'm automatically convicted. I'm already convicted tonight. Agape does not have a short fuse. It's a person who suffers long. It isn't, and here's the thing, it's not about being patient in circumstances, like, oh, I'm patient when traffic is bad, or I'm waiting to receive this news from this person. No, it's being patient with people. The idea is, I've been wronged, and I have the ability to retaliate, but I don't even consider it. We don't tell people off. A person who is filled with agape does not tell other people off when they could. Second, love is being kind. Being kind. Now, this word kind, it doesn't mean nice. It's not like, oh, love is nice. Like, oh, you're nice. That's not kindness. The word kind here in Greek, it describes doing something useful for another person. To be kind is to do something useful for them. It's the flip side of patience, because when you're being patient, you're enduring the wrong someone else has done towards you. When you are kind, you are paying back that wrong with goodness. It's the flip side. It's two sides of the same coin. Patience is, you've wronged me, and I'm allowing you to wrong me. Kindness is, I'm going to pay back what you've done to me, but I'm going to pay it back with goodness. That's the two sides. And God's love, his agape, Jesus is both. He is patient. He is kind. These two things agape is. And then Paul gives a long list of things that love is not. And these things, these are words that currently describe, that currently mark the Corinthians' behavior. Paul says, hey, listen, love is not these things, and this is how y'all are acting right now. Paul says, agape is not being jealous. Love is not being jealous. And this is really important. It's not just like, hey, I want what you have. No, it's I want what you have, but I don't want you to have it. Does that make sense? That's a different kind of jealousy. It's not just, I want what you have. It's, I want what you have, but I do not want you to have it. When you are jealous, you think that this person got the thing that you think you deserve, that you deserve that. But here's the thing, agape can rejoice when other people are blessed. Agape can be happy when someone else is rewarded. Agape, next it says, does not boast. Agape does not boast. And that word boast there means to brag, to brag. The picture in the Greek word is of a bag of wind, a wind bag. You're full of air. That's the idea. That's the picture. It's filled with air. It's basically, agape is not the kind, a person filled with agape does not make a show of themselves. They don't make a show of themselves. Like when you are boastful, when you are braggadocious, you are your favorite topic of conversation. No, agape is obsessed with other people. It loves to talk about other people and learn about other people and is concerned for other people. Agape, so it's not cocky. Agape is not proud. The word proud there means to be puffed up. That's arrogance. That's the heart posture behind bragging, like the heart attitude underneath the bragging. So bragging is like what you say, boastful, but the other one, puffed up, arrogant, that's about the heart attitude underneath the bragging. Like you really believe, you don't just say it, but you believe that I'm better than this person, I'm better than you, I don't need you. Agape is not like that. Agape is not rude. It doesn't act shamefully or disgracefully. Agape isn't indecent or inconsiderate or inappropriate. Agape is polite and courteous. Agape does not, he says, insist on its own way, or literally is not seeking the things of itself. It's putting yourself like above everyone and everything else. That's what agape doesn't do. Like you are number one in your life. And you guys, like, let's cut the crap. We all do this. Every one of us does this. A lot of the decisions that we make come from this heart posture of I am my number one. I am looking out for myself. I am my own top priority. But Jesus is nothing like that. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve others. Jesus was completely selfless, and this is what agape looks like. Jesus did not please himself. Jesus emptied himself. Agape, Paul says, is not irritable, which literally means is not provoked, is not provoked. The word provoke there means like sharp. Love is not sharp. It doesn't stab people. It isn't like touchy and like ready to fight or ready to pounce and defend itself, right? Like, I think a lot of us are like that. You know what I mean? I was on a it's funny. It was actually my fault. I almost started this fight between two 70-year-old ladies. And it was a total accident. Like, I was just pushing a stroller, and I accidentally hit a lady with the stroller, and the lady said, and this is me being sinful, I should have done something, but this lady thinks the other lady pushed her, and she's like, do we have a problem? And the other lady's like, what? She's like, you pushed me. And the one lady, these are 70-year-old ladies, and one's like, well, do you want to fight? I'm like, Elizabeth, get the camera. I was like, I really should stop this because I started it. But, so I've repented since then, I think. Anyway, so, yeah, but here's the thing, love is not like that. Love is not ready to fight at every moment. Love is not ready to defend itself. It's not ready to pounce. It's not touchy. It's not touchy. And I could be such a touchy person. I could be like that too. I get all defensive and love is not like that. Agape is not like that. Agape, Paul says, keeps no record of wrongs. This is an accounting word. Agape doesn't keep like a ledger with a record of all the wrongs committed to you by someone else. You aren't keeping track of wrongs. Because here's the thing, you guys, this is really important. God doesn't keep a ledger. God does not keep a ledger. We had a ledger. We had a record of wrongs against us, and Jesus' blood wiped it clean. There's no more ledger. He chooses to not hold our wrongs against us. And if you claim to be a follower of Jesus, if you receive that kind of agape love, then why are you keeping track of other people's sins to hold against them? Why are you mentally keeping track of what this person has done to you over and over and over again? That is not agape. And here's the thing, Paul says, listen, when someone messes up and they are exposed or they're ashamed, agape isn't happy. We don't delight in evil or destruction or wrongdoing or when people mess up and when they're exposed or ashamed. We're not happy. We don't rejoice when our enemy falls. We don't. God is not like that. And listen, that doesn't mean, that's really important, that doesn't mean that we don't call each other out on our sin and we don't call one another to repentance. We will not excuse sin. We won't look the other way or wink at sin or turn a blind eye. But Paul is saying you can confront someone without exposing someone. You can confront someone without exposing them. Agape doesn't gleefully gossip. We don't gleefully gossip, right? That's not love. Instead, agape rejoices with the truth. We celebrate when people are living out the way of Jesus. That is my source of joy. And Paul says that is worthy of throwing a party. The word rejoice here means to throw a party, a celebration. That is worthy of throwing a party. when people are walking with Jesus faithfully. The Corinthians right now, they are rejoicing in these evil practices, but Paul says this is not agape. Agape is always consistent with the truth. We do not celebrate sin, we don't affirm it, we don't endorse it, we don't approve of it. We celebrate people living according to the truth, according to the ethics of Jesus, because they lead to life. It actually says here, if you read in Greek, it says that love rejoices with the truth. So the picture is like truth itself is rejoicing, and love is at the party. Love and truth are hosting a party together, and they are together partying, rejoicing together. The two, love and truth, are never in contradiction. Jesus was fully grace, and he was fully truth. I pray to God that I would be and that we would be both. So now we're getting back to what agape is, these last few things. Paul ends with a list of 4 things that agape always does. Love always does these things. Agape bears all things. It always protects. The word here could mean to cover. It covers or endures. In everything, always, there is nothing that love cannot face. There's nothing that this kind of agape love cannot face. The image here in Greek is of a roof that doesn't leak. It covers the house. It bears the blows and the attacks of others. It covers the weaknesses of others. It says, this kind of love says, listen, I got you covered even though you hurt me. It says, I got you covered. This is agape. It says, I got you covered. Even though you hate me and even though you hurt me, I got you covered. I got you covered at all times. Agape believes, Paul says, believes or trust all things. This is the same Greek word as faith. And it could mean that agape always believes the best in people. It could be that. It always believes the best about others. Or it could be that agape always trusts God to work it all out, regardless of how I'm treated. God will work it out, and I trust that. I always trust that. It could be that. It could be one or the other. It could be both. I'm not sure. Agape always hopes. Agape always hopes. Agape, love does not see failure as the final word. And it believes in God's good purposes in this person's life. I'm not going to accept their failure as the final word until they stop breathing. I'm going to hope for God's good purpose in this person's life. And agape, Paul says, doesn't give up. It never gives up. It always perseveres. That word persevere in the Greek, it's a military term. The idea is in the middle of battle, when bullets are flying, love, agape, stands its ground. It does not run away, and it does not retreat. And this kind of agape, Paul says at the end, never fails. It never fails. The word fail there in Greek, the picture is of a flower that withers away. But it fails. The flower fails. It withers away. But this kind of love, agape, it never dies. Its fragrance doesn't fade ever. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with all of you. I have failed in so many aspects just this week in these list of 15 things with my spouse, with my child, with my coworkers, with my friends, with my neighbors, with people that I failed so hard this week. I'm a hypocrite. I am. And God forgive me, and Jesus changed my heart to bear good fruit because I failed so hard this week. But I'm encouraged that this is the kind of people that Jesus is forming, and he is not done yet. He's not done with me. He's not done with you. He is not done with us yet. But this agape, this is the definitive mark of the Spirit in us. It's love. Now, for the rest of the chapter, Paul is going to clarify what he means when he says that agape never fails. This is really important. Paul says, as for prophecies, they're going to pass away one day. We won't need to receive a word from God anymore one day, because in the new creation, Jesus will be right there with us, next to us. We could talk to him. Isn't that amazing? We're not going to need prophecy one day anymore because Jesus will be standing right next to us, and we could just talk to him. One day, Paul says, as for tongues, like speaking in tongues, these things will cease one day. One day, when Jesus returns, this form of worship won't be necessary. We'll be able to communicate with God, and we'll be able to communicate with one another. As for knowledge, Paul says, knowledge itself will pass away. Now this is really important. Paul is saying we won't need to be told things by God. Not that we'll know everything. The Bible doesn't say that. We're not going to know everything when we're in new creation. We'll definitely still be learning things and building and growing. But this gift of knowledge, when the Spirit tells us something we wouldn't have otherwise known, that won't be necessary in the age to come. You see, the Corinthians, they had it all backwards. They were obsessed with these things like prophecy, speaking in tongues, knowledge. And what all three of those things have in common is that one day they're going to cease, and they're going to be rendered useless, and they're going to pass away one day. That's what all these things have in common. The things that they're obsessed with. That they're so obsessed with the temporal. They're so obsessed with that which is going to pass away. Knowledge, speaking in tongues, prophecy. These things are one day going to be rendered useless, and they will pass away. Listen, they're necessary. They're necessary right now, but they won't be forever. Do you get it? They're focused on the things that they thought were like part of our eternal nature, right? And they thought like, oh, other things, like our physical body, they just assumed that would pass away, right? But these cool things, like the stuff the Spirit does, that's the stuff that's going to last. And Paul says, you guys got it flipped. You have it flipped. Because your physical body, Christian, your physical body is going to last forever. It will. What you do with it, this body, this one, is going to rise again one day. What you do with it matters. And what you do with these gifts, these manifestations of the Spirit, those matter too. But the difference is they aren't going to last forever. You're focusing on the temporal, not the eternal. You're making your life about things that are going to pass away and not making your life about the one thing, these few things that are going to last forever. And remember, Paul believes that we live in this unique period in human history. Paul believes that there are two ages. There's this age, and then there's the age to come. But something crazy happened 2,000 years ago. With the resurrection of Jesus, the new age has broken into this age that we live in. The new age has broken into this age. And we live in this unique period in human history called the overlap of the ages, where we can have eternal life. We can have life of the age to come, even in the middle of this present age. But this age, it's like a Venn diagram, these two. We're moving this way. And these two circles. This age is passing away, and it's passing away quickly. We are in the dawn of a whole new creation, on the cusp of a whole new reality. And the things the Corinthians were obsessed with, they are necessary, yes, for this overlap period, but only then. They're not going to be necessary in the age to come, the age that's begun and will one day be here when Jesus returns. Does that make sense? We're becoming obsessed with these things that are going to pass away one day along with this age. We're not focusing on the age to come. Paul says, listen, we know in part. Like we know that which God has revealed to us, but we don't know everything. And we prophesy, Paul says, in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. The reality will replace the replica. The substance will supersede the shadow. This is what Jesus talked about when he talked about marriage and how marriage is not going to last forever. It's because the real thing, the thing that marriage is pointing to, is going to be here. And when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's what Jesus meant. Yeah, go ahead.
So is the perfect here in new creation or like the fullness of God's love that we will experience in new creation? Like, is it
Yeah, both. Yeah, I think it's I think perfect because he says face to face. So the perfect has a face. And so I think he's talking about our experience of seeing Jesus on that day when he returns, reunites heaven and earth. We're in the new creation, bodies resurrected, perfect intimacy, love, communion with God and with one another. I think that's what that's referring to. And these things that are necessary now in this overlap period will one day pass away. The substance will replace the shadow. The reality will replace the replica. The perfect will replace the partial. Great question. Yeah, Kaylee. No. Yeah, the Spirit. Yeah. No, yeah. All three members of the Trinity will be there in new creation, and the Spirit, the life-giving water, the rivers of Eden, is one symbolic image of it. It's gonna empower us. The same Spirit that rose Jesus from the dead is inside of us, and will one day bring life to our mortal bodies, and will raise us to life. And so Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 15. We're gonna read this in about a month. He says we are gonna have a spiritual body, and when he says spiritual, there he doesn't mean esoteric, non-physical. That's not what spiritual means. That's what it means in a post-enlightenment garbage, whatever. No, the word spiritual means empowered by the Spirit. We're going to have physical bodies empowered by the Spirit of God, and that's going to be an eternal experience, an eternal existence. Does that make sense? Yeah. But these things, these manifestations of the Spirit, these ones will not be necessary in the age to come. They're necessary now. Tongues, prophecy, these are important now, but they won't be one day when the fullness comes and when heaven and earth are reunited and we're able to perfectly commune and communicate with God and with one another, and the sin is removed. Yeah, these things won't be necessary at that point. Does that make sense? That's a great question. Yeah. We good? Can I keep going? Any questions? Yeah. I don't want to stop anyone. If you have a question, please feel free to interrupt me. So this is really cool. So what are we talking about? Oh, yeah. So this is really important. He says that the perfect will replace the partial. Now, the Greek word for perfect there is teleon. Can you guys say teleon? Say it again. That's funny. So teleon, the word teleon, that word means like, the word perfect there, it means like the goal, what all of human history is heading towards, the telos. And that word teleon can also be translated as wholeness or completeness. When Jesus says to be perfect, he's saying be whole, be complete. Or even sometimes the word teleon means maturity. When maturity comes, the partial will pass away. And this is what maturity. So think perfect. The word perfect means whole, complete, or mature. And that is why Paul says what he says next. Paul says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I gave up my childish ways. Now, the Greek word there for gave up, that's the Greek word katargeo. Katargeo. Can you guys say katargeo? Yeah, katargeo. And that's the same word that Paul uses when he says that these things will pass away. He says, when I became a man, my childish ways, my childish things, they passed away. When the perfect comes, when the teleon comes, everything, all these other things, the partial, will katargeo. And in the same way, when I became a man, when I became mature, these things passed away. The childish things, they passed away. For Paul, and this is really important, I want everyone to hear this tonight. If you're a follower of Jesus, you need to hear this. For Paul, agape is the measure of spiritual maturity. Agape love is the measure of spiritual maturity. The goal, the telos of my life of following Jesus is not just so that I could read the Bible every day or pray 3 times a day or fast once a week or Sabbath once a week. Listen, I do those things, and those things are great, but those are not the ends. Those are a means to an end. And the end is becoming a person of agape, just like Jesus, becoming more like the God we image, becoming truly human. That is maturity. It's putting away childish things. And yes, please hear me, our faith should be childlike, but we should not be childish. There's a big difference between the two. When he says childish, Paul means selfish, cocky, putting your needs first. Basically, everything in that list that agape isn't, that is childishness. That is immaturity. So what? Question. What, according to Paul, is maturity? What's maturity? What does it mean to be a man or a woman who follows Jesus? For Paul, what does that mean to be a true man, a true woman? What does that look like? This is what it looks like. It means to live a life of agape, which leads to a life of holiness. It looks like focusing on the things of God, not the things of Billy. That is maturity. When I stop focusing on the things of Billy and I focus on the things of God, that is maturity. It looks like focusing on that which is eternal, the stuff that's going to last, and not just the short-term stuff, like what looks good and feels good and is kind of cool in the moment, right? When I was a kid, when I was a little boy, all I wanted to do was focus on what was right in front of me. What's cool, what looks good, feels good in front of me, what's right in front of me. That is childishness. And that's what many of us do when we focus on the temporal and not the eternal. To be mature means to focus on that which is going to last forever and not just the short-term stuff that looks cool or feels good or looks good to us. I'm not focused on what I think will make me happy in the present moment. I am focusing on the long game. I am focusing on the age to come, because how I live now will contribute to how I live then. Does that make sense? Let me say something real quick to the guys in the room. Paul definitely speaks to both genders here. But for the guys, please hear this. Look at what he says about what it means to be a man. To be a man, it's being patient and kind. If you're not patient and kind, if you're selfish and cocky, I'm preaching to myself. According to Paul, you're not a real man. You're not. You're not a man. You're a boy still. If you are selfish and cocky, if you are interested in the things of self and not the things of others, to be a man is to not be cocky or selfish. It's being sacrificial. It's being forgiving. It's always being the first to lay down my preferences and my hopes and my dreams and even my life if it comes down to it. That's agape, and that's what a real man looks like. They're always the first on the line and always the first to die, just like Jesus. And so I'm talking to everyone now, but I just want to say that real quick to the guys in the room. For Paul, maturity is also humility. Humility. Maturity is humility. It's acknowledging that I only know in part, right? It's accepting that I'm not fully there yet. I haven't arrived, right? There's always room to grow this side of resurrection. They thought that they were mature, and that just shows that they weren't mature. If you know someone who's like, oh yeah, I follow Jesus, I'm so mature, I'm so awesome, it's like, no, you're not. You just showed me you're not. You're not. If someone's walking around like, oh, I'm so mature, you're not. You are not. You're not mature. You're still a child. Dude, no. The person who is mature is so humble. They are so humble. They know that I am not there yet, And I know myself, I know my sin, and I have so many ways in which I need to grow, and I'm not there yet. Paul says, now we know in part. We don't know Jesus fully yet. We don't have all of the answers to our questions yet. Paul uses this other metaphor. This is so cool. Now at the present time, Paul says, we see only dimly as in a mirror. Corinth was the primary mirror manufacturing and distributing city in the ancient world. They made mirrors. That was like their thing. But these weren't the kind of mirrors like the ones we have today. They were kind of dim. They weren't like picture perfect with all the details you could see. But even with our mirrors that we have today, that reflection is not the real thing. The reflection is not the real thing. At this time, Paul says, we see the face of God dimly when we look at Jesus. But one day, he says, it won't be a mirror anymore. It won't be dim. We will see him face to face. And John says in 1 John chapter 3, we will become like Jesus on the day he returns. When we see him, when we behold him, and we look at him, and we see him as he truly is, face to face, in that moment, we will become like him. Paul says, now we know in part. We don't know him fully yet. We don't have all the answers to our questions. We know that which has been revealed to us, sure, but one day, Paul says, we shall know fully, even as he fully knows us. This is so cool. Paul is saying, and this just makes me want to cry when I think about it, think of it this way. God sees us, right? Not just the outside of us, but the deepest layers of what makes me me. He sees the inside of me as clearly as he sees the outside of me. And we can't reciprocate that experience with God now, but one day we will. One day, Paul says, we won't just see God like with our eyes, our resurrected eyes, but we will know him as deeply as he knows us. I'll be able to look not just at the face of Jesus, I'll be able to look at his heart. The way he sees my heart, I'll be able to see his. Like, wow. I don't know what that means other than just perfect intimacy, complete fellowship, wholeness in our entire beings, face to face with God. So until that day, Paul says, as we wander the wilderness to the promised land, as we race through this overlap of the ages period on our way to the finish line, these three things, Paul says, remain. These three things should consume our focus. Tongues, prophecy, knowledge, yeah, those are all good things. They're awesome, they're legit. We're going to talk about that more next week, but they will not last forever. But what does remain, what abides, the things that are going to propel us into the age to come one day, those three things that are going to propel us into the age to come are faith, hope, and love. These three things are what the way of Jesus is all about. Now, faith here, this is really important. Faith here doesn't just mean like belief. The word faith here more accurately is translated as faithfulness. Faithfulness. It's living out embodied allegiance and believing loyalty to King Jesus. That is faith. That is faith. And hope is not just some blind optimism or some stupid, vague, wishful thinking. Hope is confident expectation in God's future good purposes based on what he's already done in the past. Our hope is not some idea that we think of. Our hope is a living person who is coming back here one day. We aren't waiting on experiences or just waiting on circumstances to get better. No, we're waiting on a person to come here and make all things new. Jesus is our living hope. And agape. Agape. Well, hopefully you know what agape is by now. This is what it means to live under the reign of God, the reign of Jesus. What does it look like to live under his reign? What does it look like to live with him as your king? It looks like loving God and loving others. But, Paul says, last verse, the greatest of these, faith, hope, and love, the greatest of those three is agape. Because yes, please hear me, yes, faith saves us. Yes, hope sustains us. But one day, both of those things, faith and hope, those will pass away too. One day, I'm not going to need those things anymore. Our faith will become our eyes. Our eyes. We will see Jesus. And our hope, our inheritance will be here. Heaven and earth will be reunited. New creation, resurrection, it's going to happen. Everything that we hope for as Jesus' followers, what his resurrection guarantees will come to pass. So faith and hope, they won't be necessary anymore. But love, that is the reality of the world to come. That is the reality of the world to come. Love never, and it will never fail. We are going to be loving God and loving one another for all eternity. Yes, tongues are cool, prophecy is great, but love, that's what's really going to last forever. That will not pass away. So make your life about that. Don't make your life about these things that are going to pass away. Don't obsess. Don't let your wants and your worries be consumed by these things that you know one day are not going to be here when Jesus returns. You know what will be here? You'll be here. You'll be here. And these relationships we formed will be here. Focus on that which will last forever. Make your life about that which will last forever. This is the true mark of maturity. You know, many of you have said to me in the past before, you said something to me. You said, Billy, I so appreciate your teaching. And thank you for that. Thank you. Like, I know you're intending to encourage me. You are encouraging me when you say that. I know what you mean by that. I know what you're saying by that. Like, God has given me a gift, and it's my job to share it with all of you. So thank you for affirming God's call on my life. Thank you. But when I die, I hope that I'm not just remembered for being a guy with a head full of knowledge. I hope I'm also remembered for having a heart full of love. I'd be pretty content if people knew about the love more than the knowledge. I want this chapter to describe me. It describes Jesus perfectly. And I'm his follower. I'm his apprentice. I want his life. I want his lifestyle to become the template for mine, because this is the definition of what it means to be truly human. So agape your brother in Christ. Agape your sister in Messiah. Agape your coworker. Agape your friend. Agape your neighbor. Agape even your enemy. And expect nothing in return, even if you lose it all. Because God is agape. So image God, follow Jesus, put away childish things, pursue maturity, because he won't be dim forever. This is the most excellent way, the way that is beyond comparison. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this night. Thank you for the opportunity we have to gather and be together with your people to study your word. I'm always so floored